Let me, I was trying to squeeze several people in, so I squeezed Mr. Tiart down to 3 minutes. Let me simply go back to Mr. Tiart for another 2 or 3 minutes to see what other questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hall, you mentioned utilities declining in job, if I understood you correctly, in the number of jobs. I guess if you combine that with Ms. Ellis Lankin's move to increase green jobs, many of those would be in the area of utilities. And I've often thought we could do simple things like they do in Germany, where they have net metering, and that would encourage people to go out and produce electricity either through solar panel or a wind generator. And in Kansas, we're very interested in wind generators because we got a continuous south wind. Kansaw in the Sioux Indian, in the Oglala Sioux Indian language means people of the south wind, and believe me, we are the people of the south wind. So I think there's actually, in the utility sector, unless you categorize some of those as manufacturing jobs, how would you explain the projection in utility jobs going down?
You mean what's behind the?
Yeah, what's behind the projection? Is it because we're more productivity or higher productivity in generating power or electricity or other forms of energy?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know great detail on that one specifically. A lot of what we do, obviously, is we look at trends in employment within the industry.
So it makes the assumption that utilities are in a more productivity trend, higher productivity trend than we would see, and we expect that to continue.
I believe that's so. That's certainly the case with, say, for manufacturing. That's part of why we talk about manufacturing jobs declining over time. Productivity growth.
I can speak to the utility question a little bit.
Please.
I'm working on a book on green jobs and career advancement right now. Part of it is that when you talk about wind or solar, the utilities are purchasers of that power. And so that the jobs associated with wind or solar won't be credited under utilities since they're simply purchasing it.
I see. I got something from my power company here in Northern Virginia, Dominion. It's a customer connection. It's sign up for green power. In red, and perhaps there's some analogy of this, it says purchase power equal to 100% of your monthly electrical usage. The cost is an additional 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. If, for example, use 1,000 kilowatts, that's $15 more. You could also purchase blocks at 133 kilowatts at $2, which calculates basically the same cost, 1.5 cents more kilowatt hour. Apparently, it's more expensive to generate green electricity. I'm a little puzzled because, you know, electrons are not colored. What little I know about electrons, they're not colored. But it does cost more to generate green power at this point.
If you look at, let me just give you an example. One is Austin Energy. Austin Energy is a utility in the Austin, Texas area, where there's a mandate from the city, a portfolio standard to produce a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable sources. They just signed on to produce a 300 megawatt solar farm that's going to be built. They will purchase that power. They got a fabulous deal. It's about 17 cents a kilowatt. Natural gas is about 8 or 9 cents. And so what they're doing,
retail or at the wholesale?
That's their purchase cost. And what they're doing is investing in renewable energy in the belief that the cost will go down over time, and there's every reason to believe that. It already has become par in wind, but as much as solar as they move to thermal solar and thin film solar, much more likely to move in that direction. So it is more expensive. So a plan like you mentioned that Austin has, it's either because you have a very green community and they sign on, but what you're finding is a lot of manufacturers are actually signing on to those green power purchase plans because they're long-term plans. So they would go to X wind farm and say, we're going to purchase all your energy over the next 30 years. Then they'll lock people into that price. So that's very appealing as a business to know what that utility cost is going to be over the long term. So you either get green people who are willing to pay the premium for the renewable energy, or you get your big customers, your manufacturing and other institutional customers who like the security of the long-term prices. And in some time with wind, it's actually cheaper over the long run.
What I've seen in Kansas, Fort Hays State University, for example, has their power rates are determined by the high usage months, which are August and September because of air conditioning. That's when the students come. So they have bought diesel-powered generators and are what they call cost shaving. When they get to a certain usage, these generators kick on, and that holds their rates down for the rest of the year. So,
but that's
how do
one
you
way they
sell-
could
how do
deal
you
with
sell
this.
this?
Another way they could deal with that would be some of the efficiency programs, and encourage the universities and others to go to much more efficient systems of air conditioning to shave that peak. And that's what Austin Energy does as well.
well, I guess we'll have time later on for another round.
Well,
All right, I'll
until 1 o'clock.
to 1 o'clock. Okay, well, I think I'll
Mr. Honda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Dr. Fitzgerald, just a quick question. It's a training question. Are there small changes that we can make this year to Title VIII training programs to expand opportunities to the CNAs and LPNs without creating new programs? If you would like to look at that and get back to us,
Okay.
appreciate it. Yeah. And a general question. We're all looking at the green collar workforce, and we're all involved in certain kinds of activities. But that on an international level, when we're looking at global activities, and with the current distrust between our country and China for historical reasons, but also the relationship that we have because of trade and things like that. Are there opportunities for the areas that we have influence over to create what might be called a sister city kind of a relationship of activities here and link with another group in China, so that we can start looking at ways to find commonalities so that we can start, one, develop a confidence with each other, a track record. And it doesn't, I don't think it needs to be formalized through State Department or anything else like that, but kind of a people-to-people like activities to start moving this ball towards some international cooperation, so that at a certain point in the future, as a country, we'll be ready and have a little bit more work done with people when we're ready to look at a relationship between our country and China in ways to move forward on this struggle to attack this global warming. The greenhouse gas is kind of a challenge that we have in the future.
Is that for me?
Anyone?
For anyone.
Oh, okay. Do you want to go first, or do you want?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of sister city programs, and I don't know that they're very meaningful. And
Well, what I was thinking of was the model would be something like that, where you find likes in the other countries, so you can start developing this relationship and build trust and things like that.
Well, in terms on the green issues, and you may want to speak to this, there's a international organization called ICLEA, I-C-L-E-A. It's international. I never remember what it stands for, but it's an organization working on climate change and sustainability issues in cities that offers technical assistance, primarily working in Europe, South America, and the United States. And it would be very interesting, particularly because they're building brand new eco-cities in China to try to bring Chinese cities into that organization. So I think around the global warming or sustainability issue in cities, that there's an organization that probably would be very good in facilitating that.
Are we involved in eco cities also?
are we involved in ICLEI? It's a city by city. There's about 850 cities throughout the world that are involved in that, and many are. Is Oakland?
I don't know that Oakland is, but San Jose is.
Okay.
I think the real issue with these, I'm actually doing some research on these various organizations. I mean, 700 some U.S. cities have signed on to the U.S. Council of Mayors Climate Change Agreement. And, you know, so what? It doesn't require them to do anything. So what we really need to focus on are organizations on the ground that are working in cities so that these umbrella organizations are meaningful in terms of motivating change.
Well, the question was taking on that activity and finding a for lack of a better word, a kindred spirit in China that you can link up to and create this partnership so that people start it before government starts.
Mr. Honda, I think it's an excellent question because I think the real challenge is how do you create a spirit of cooperation among people who want change? And I think there's a lot of groups in China who are also doing, like was talked about before, who are trying to do work both around global climate change and also trying to create models. I think there's also been a lot of both government investment, certainly in infrastructure and technology, and so I think we both can learn from where investments were made, how to make it easier to be essentially entrepreneurial in spirit. And in addition is to figure out what are the groups that we can partner with, and we'd be certainly happy to send your office a list of groups that we think might be prospective partners in China, and also to think about groups on the ground that are doing work here in the United States that are in some of those international relationships.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Dr. Hall, you said that 4 states right now are at 10% or above in terms of unemployment. Which ones are they?
Michigan, 11.6%. Sorry. Michigan, 11.6%. South Carolina, 10.4%. Rhode Island, 10.3%. And California, 10.1%.
South Carolina, you say, is among them?
Yes.
Okay. And which are the next tier? Which states do you expect that we will see above 10% within the next 3 months or so?
Yeah, it's hard for me to want to, it's difficult for me to project data since we produce the data. It always sort of puts me into a bind because we do collect the data. I can tell you that the trends for all the states up to now have had rising unemployment rates, and there hasn't been pretty significantly rising unemployment rates. All 50 states have risen since the recession started, and there's no real indication that's going to stop.
What would you say are the characteristics of the 4 or 5 states that at this point have the lowest unemployment levels?
You know, it's hard to say because the states seem to have almost characteristic unemployment rates. Some states run generally above average, some run generally below average. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with their industry mix, what sort of industries they've got. You know, there's been such a long-run trend, for example, in manufacturing, declining employment in manufacturing. States who have heavily invested in manufacturing have generally higher unemployment rates, for example. All the states have gone up because the unemployment has gone up in all industries just about. So it's been a very, very wide spread, just that some states have started from higher levels.
The Brookings Institution recently released a report on middle-skilled jobs, which they say constitute nearly half of the U.S. Employment. And the report defines these jobs as those that require a significant amount of education and training, such as an associate degree or certificate, but not necessarily a 4-year bachelor's degree, jobs like plumbers, machinists, et cetera.
Yes.
The report seems to support the notion that they're good-paying jobs that don't require a significant post-secondary education, or at least not 4 years. What's your reaction to the notion of middle-skilled jobs, whether there's a skills gap that needs to be addressed today, and whether the coming retirement boom will widen the skills gap?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, obviously, our projections show job growth at all skill levels, but there's sort of two spots where it really jumps out. I've got a nice chart I can look at here. One is at the very lowest level. And a lot of replacement jobs at sort of minimal training level jobs. And then there's a lot of job growth at college education, bachelor's degree or above. And so that does leave a fairly substantial gap in between where the job growth isn't quite as high, likely to be quite as high.
One other question for you. How much does the decline of manufacturing in this country, in your judgment, add to the gap between incomes in this country? Do you have any way of assessing that?
Not really directly. That's a good question, though, because I think you're right. I think the manufacturing jobs probably do have their share of those in between education levels that you're talking about. Those in between jobs, something below a bachelor's degree and something above minimal training. So I haven't studied it, but my guess is that does contribute.
May I respond to that one? Because I think there's plenty of evidence to show that the decline of manufacturing has contributed to the widening income gap in the United States. And that's why a lot of the green jobs work is so important, because so many of these jobs are in manufacturing. And the representative from Ohio earlier spoke about the businesses in Ohio that could produce parts for the wind turbines. There's a whole organization in Ohio that's trying to make that happen, make the supply chains in manufacturing for wind, for other forms of renewable energy. And time after time, what the manufacturers are saying is, we can't get people that are willing to go into these jobs, these training programs, certificate level or whatever. So supporting policy in the green area that would support manufacturing has a potential for creating a lot of those middle wage jobs, and also the health care. And I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but those allied health technician positions, most of them are either 9-month to 1-year community college programs, and they pay living wages.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask either one of you, and let me take the devil's advocate position. There are some people around here and some people around the country who will poo-poo the whole idea of green jobs, and they'll say, that's just the latest fad, that's just the latest label. People are going to shop around this country and this budget looking for anything that's labeled green. They'll try to associate themselves with it and pull off a piece of the change. What's your response to that? What would you say to demonstrate that when you're talking about developing green jobs in the economy, that you're taking a hard-headed look at economic realities and not just behaving like you're permanent president of an optimist club or something?
Thank you for the question. First, let me apologize for being late. I misunderstood.
We just got back earlier than we thought.
Okay, but I wanted to. I think that's a really important question, and I think it's a pretty consistent question when change happens. When new and exciting change happens, people freak out. It's a pretty normal response. We sat with a group of CEOs. Never in Congress, thank gosh. But we sat in with a group of CEOs in Silicon Valley, and listening to their stories, from Google to Hewlett-Packard, to thinking about when they made the case that there was something different happening and that technology might transform the way we worked. People disagreed, thought they were crazy, and thought it was something that would only happen in California. And so what I would say to people who say it's not real is I would say they should look at the examples from solar, where we're beginning to see not only the installation of solar in places like Richmond and Atlanta, but they should look at not only what's being created, but they should think about whether we want to be on the front of innovation. If you had said 5 years ago you thought U.S. car manufacturing could make a resurgence, but when you look at places like Tesla, one of the only companies that's going to be increasing the numbers of manufacturing jobs in automaking. When you look at companies that are thinking about that, when we've sat with these companies that are ready to grow, we look at Chicago Republic Windows, the workers that stayed in the plant. That was bought by someone who was actually going to use it to do retrofitting as part of the stimulus package. So what I would say to them is, when we look at examples of manufacturing that used to exist, and what we see is not only the commitment to grow, but to be able to increase it. Those jobs are going to increase, not just stay where they are, but increase. And so the question is, will we be ready as a country for it?
Just to add to that, if we just look at renewable energy, solar and wind, the United States is the innovator of solar energy. And right now, if we looked at both in solar and wind, who are the top 10 producers? We'd have maybe 1 or 2 companies that are in the United States. We've just let the manufacturing go. And in wind and solar, 70 to 75% of the jobs are in manufacturing. And what are we talking about? We're talking about projects in the ground. That's important. But if we're not building them here, we're not going to take advantage of those jobs. So we really have to build that in. Another example is public transportation. We're talking about expanding subway systems, light rail systems, all of these, creating jobs in construction, zero on producing them here. We do, because there are domestic content, we do a little bit of the assembly. So like we get maybe 10% of the value added on this. And so when we're thinking about the stimulus package, let's make sure that we look at how some of these manufacturing jobs are going to be U.S. jobs. Otherwise, we're just going to be paying for manufacturing jobs elsewhere.
Well, to me, one example about which I'm the most zealous is the example of new battery technology for the auto industry, for cars that we would like to see running on electricity rather than gasoline. I, for the life of me, don't see how our auto industry recovers international leadership unless we are in the forefront of developing new technology that includes new kinds of batteries that will power those new kinds of vehicles. Which is why we put over $2 billion into the stimulus package for that purpose. What policies should we consider to maximize the earnings potential of the green jobs we're creating, as well as the policies that keep? You were just talking about keeping green jobs at home. Any other specific suggestions you'd have on how to build a focus to do that?
I have a couple. I think that there are a couple things that really are important. The one thing that I want to just raise that we hear time and time again in local communities where they're doing excellent work is their concern about federal preemption when they have good local law. And so one thing is, what do you do when there's good local standards that are stronger than the federal regulation? And so I would first just raise the issue of figuring out how to recognize good standards at a local level. The second is, there's a lot of good models for this. From community benefits agreements to project labor agreements. The way that we've often thought about it is that there's a 3-pronged approach: pre-qualification of contractors, standards when there is contracts in place, and enforcement and resources for enforcement. So part of it is also making sure when there's an investment, there's a way to ensure that the regulations are actually maintained. In addition, we've got a proposal for the Clean Energy Corp to think about how do you create those jobs, encourage workforce development with that, and to be able to make sure that is funded. In addition, funding the Green Jobs Act, I think, will be critically important in the future. Thinking about manufacturing, many cities and jurisdictions across the country are putting aside millions of square feet to be able to attract manufacturing industrial land, and to think about what that strategy will be so that there is a package to be able to make sure that manufacturing happens and that it happens with standards. I think you made a great point, Chairman Obi, about even the idea of middle-class jobs. There's 48,000 apprentices in this country just alone in the plumbers and pipe fitters. And for us to think about how do we make it easier for folks to be able to join those type of programs, and how do we ensure that when there is investment spent through the recovery money, that those jobs are jobs that will continue, not short-term jobs. So thinking about pre-apprenticeship opportunities so that people move into those jobs.
Dr. Fitzgerald, with respect to health care, you were talking earlier about the need to try to increase wages for people working in the field, and you mentioned nurses, for instance. You know, the general concern in this country is how we reduce healthcare costs. So when you talk about increasing wages in the healthcare field, that would seem to be counterintuitive. But you mentioned that in fact it could help save money or to increase quality because of lessening of turnover. Beyond the turnover issue, how else would you defend the idea that we can afford to provide universal health care with rising wages at the same time that the president is talking about reducing health care costs by health care reform?
Well, first, of course, there is the turnover issue, but there's also the broader level of commitment to employment. So Kaiser Permanente, for example, in the programs they've developed throughout the country with their 27 unions, one of the things they've really done is return on investment analysis. That definitely shows that by investing in your workers and creating opportunities for them to advance lowers costs dramatically. In that, for example, to replace a nurse costs about $150,000 in the whole time spent when that position is vacant, then when it's filled with someone that needs to learn a whole new system. So that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect of it is quality of care. If you've invested in a better trained aide, they're more likely to help reduce, for example, falls, which are a major problem, bed sores, urinary tract infections because people aren't taken to the bathroom enough. So that better trained aides and licensed practical nurse deliver better care and actually reduce the health care costs of those facilities that invest in them. So that's another key area, and the other is a morale issue, so that if people feel invested in and part of the organization, they're part of the process and can help an organization look for ways to cut costs. And nursing homes, it's in the book, can demonstrate that is the case. So I would say those are the three key areas.
Okay, one last question now. Can you elaborate on how much of the nursing shortage and limited nursing career ladder opportunities are due to nursing school faculty shortages? I mean, I keep hearing that even if we provide funding for nurses training, we have a bottleneck because often people who are out in the field are making more than people who are on the faculty trying to teach people to be nurses. How do you see us dealing with that problem?
I would look to Oregon in the longer part of my testimony that talks about different models for making it easier to do the training, whether it's SimMan training to replace some clinicals, coordinating and so forth. But yeah, I think, the most obvious thing is you raise the wages at the university level. But it's difficult to do even for community colleges because they're very expensive programs to run. In terms of the faculty-student ratio is much smaller than it is when you can put 500 students, in a history class. And throughout the curriculum, you have that kind of student-teacher ratio. Plus, there's the clinicals. There's a real shortage of clinical sites. And so what you find is a hospital is much more likely to accept clinicals from a bachelor's degree program than it is from the community college. And so you create that bottleneck. So it has to be dealt with in terms of technological creativity and how we educate nurses, but we also, it just makes perfect sense. No rational nurse is going to make the decision, I'm going to teach for $20,000 less a year and put in more hours than I would. So I think that kind of legislation that helps the universities subsidize those salaries would be one way to address that bottleneck.
Okay, well, another would simply be if we had state legislators who were willing to meet their responsibilities to their own universities. I know that in my state, when I left the legislature, about 42% of the operating cost of the University of Wisconsin was paid for out of the state general fund financed by the state legislatures. Today, that's down to about 19%. they've walked away from their responsibilities to fund the universities at an adequate level, and then they wonder why tuition goes up and it becomes less affordable for kids to go.
Right. No, that's exactly right.
Mr. Tiart?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for a good hearing. I thought it was very interesting, stimulating, and I think we've learned a lot, and so thank you very much.
All righty.
And thank you to the witnesses. Appreciate you being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming.